Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing Railroad Revolution. This is a 2 to 4 player game designed by Marco Canetta and Stefania Niccolini, and in this game you will be laying track, building train stations, and expanding the telegraph network to mimic the revolution that happened over 100 years ago in the United States. You will be doing all these things using an action selection mechanism with specialized workers. I'll show you how this game actually plays, and then I'll jump into my review. Here we have the board fully set up for a 2-player game. This is between the red and blue players, and you'll notice that we both start with a railroad between the cities of Washington and Charlotte, and out here on the main map we have a whole bunch of cities that show us from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, and we have randomized the various city bonus tokens on them so that all of the level 2s are shuffled up within that spot, and then like all of these 3 teal level 4s are shuffled up for those, so there's a different setup each time you sit down to play the game. You'll also notice that we have these little black house markers. This is a non-player character, and we've put these into the first station locations in order to kind of block some of the bonuses because this is not a full 4-player game. In the 2-player and 3-player game, you put these blockers out to tighten the board up a little bit. Looking down here, we have the Western Union area, and once again, we have some of these non-player tokens in here in the first player spots, and this shows the expansion of the telegraph network and gives a lot of different bonuses for actually expanding the network, and also, once again, these tiles are shoveled up and put down into different configurations each time we play the game. Lastly, we have these scoring tracks over here, and you'll notice that everybody starts at 0 on these tracks, and these are going to give the players certain amounts of points based on various conditions that they've done throughout the game. For instance, a certain number of stations they built throughout the game times their specific spot they got to on this column will give them a certain number of points, and I'll go into this more later. Here's the player's area at the start of the game, but they have a couple more things to do before they can actually begin. The first is they need to grab an A2 and an A1 milestone, and these will be face up in front of them, and they provide them with goals that they can target while they're actually playing the game. Next up, they have these 4 white workers over here, but white are very generic, and in this game there are 4 other different colored workers that will do specialized, much more interesting things as you're playing. So the last thing the players need to do now is to take one of these 4 specific colored workers and the bonus that is associated with them, even though I shuffled these up at the start. Now this happens in reverse player order, so as the star player, the red player does not get to pick first, the blue player does, so in their case, they might take this one here, which means they'll start the game with the gray worker, and they also get to start the game by placing a railroad down for free onto the map. And then we could grab this teal worker and this bonus here, which lets us get 3 bumps on our scoring tracks right here at the beginning of the game. We can now do that and discard these because this is only a 2-player game, so no one else will have the option of grabbing them. With these 3 score track bumps, we can do one of them 3 times or split amongst all 3 of them. For instance, I could just take this one and go 1, 2, 3, and now at the end of the game, I will get 3 points for every single one of my little houses in the Western Union spots down here. It's also worth noting that there are some penalties for crossing over certain thresholds. If we wanted to go from here to here, we would have to spend $50 back to the bank. If we wanted to go from here to here, it would cost us 1 of our telegraph stock. And lastly, from here to here, we would need to actually discard one of our workers permanently. On a player's turn, they simply select one of their available workers, and they put them down onto one of the 4 spots on their action selection board. There are no restrictions here. You can go to the same spot that you've been to in the past, and if all of your workers are actually out on the board, that's no problem. You just clear them off for free and then immediately place a new worker down onto the spots. The 4 location actions are building a station, building railroads, building into the Western Union telegraph line, and finally doing some trade actions. If you look down below at each of these action spots, you'll see that there is the same bonus for the white colored workers, but there is a different bonus for each of the 4 other colored workers when you go to these spots. So let's go ahead and start off by evaluating these, and I'll show you how they work with just the white workers, and then I'll give you a couple examples of how the extra bonuses work. So let's say that we want to go ahead and build a station out onto the map. The first thing we do is we take our leftmost house symbol over here from the track. You're only allowed to build the station in a city that you are connected through railroads, and at the beginning of the game for us, that is going to be just Washington and Charlotte. We see that the blue player used their bonus to place this railroad down, so right from the beginning, they are already connected to Little Rock. Let's go ahead and say that we want to put it down here, and it's going to cost us money equal to the banner at the top of the city, so in this case, it'll be $500. And now that we've paid for the station, we can go ahead and take the bonuses associated with it. We see that this little icon here is associated with being the first station in that spot, so we would get to take 2 telegraph stock from the supply because we're the first ones there, and then everybody, no matter if they're first or last, gets to have this bonus here, which means they can either grab a purple or a blue worker into their stock. Well, we already have a blue worker, so let's go ahead and grab this purple one and put it into our supply. And with that, we are done with that specific action. So now let's go ahead and look at new ones. But before I even do that, let's look at these milestones over here. We see this milestone says that we need to have one station built in a level 1 city, which we just did in Charlotte. But then we also are going to need to have one station built in a level 2 city, which means we will need to get railroad tracks out to level 2 cities. We also have this milestone, which says that we need to have 2 railroad tracks built on railroad spots that have only a single brown mountain icon on them. So with that, let's go ahead and explain how the railroad track action now works. On a future turn, we could evaluate this, and we see that it's going to cost us $400, and then another $100 for each of the little mountain symbols that we put our railroad tracks down, but we also must put 2 of these railroad sticks down for this overall cost. Since one of our milestones involves putting track down into spots with this little brown triangle, we probably want to put this here. Also, we are now connected to Boston here, which is a level 2 city, which our other milestone wants us to put a station down into. Next up, we have this one here, and we could go ahead and put that down here. And you notice with these 3 little lines, that just means these are planes, and there's no actual penalty for placing that railroad track there. So this is going to cost us $400 plus $100 more because there is a single mountain symbol that we just covered up with this overall action. But you'll also notice we are now connected down here to Miami, which is also a level 2 city. That means that we need to spend $500 overall, but we only have $100 here. Fortunately, we have all this stock, which can also be count as money. So we can go ahead and discard all 3 of these. That's going to be $450 worth of money. We can get rid of this 100, get 50 back from the bank, and that railroad track is going to be fully paid for. Unfortunately, we're starting to look a little low on money, so on our next turn, we could potentially take one of our people and activate the Western Union spot. With this, we simply take our leftmost house token here, and we put this into the telegraph line section. When you actually place this down, there is no specific cost associated. In fact, realistically, you're just going to be getting benefits. For being the first person, you're going to get this number of extra stock. So for going in this place, I will get 1 telegraph stock, and then everybody who goes here is going to get 3 more telegraph stock. Now, you might be looking at that and figure it might make more sense for me to go over here where there's a one-time bonus of 3 that nobody else will gather, but I am much more interested in this ability that is up at the top, and this is optional. So I have all this telegraph stock, and now I can choose to discard one of my workers permanently in order to take this action on the right-hand side. And this cost is the same for all of the different telegraph spots, but the benefit differs. When we look down to our area, we can see that we now have 6 workers. We started with 5, but we gained this extra purple one. When we get rid of them for this bonus on the Western Union section, we can either get rid of an active one or an inactive one that we've already used. So let's go ahead and just take this person and permanently remove them in order to do that action of getting a new train. It's very important for me to note at this point, though, that you're never allowed to go down to less than 4 workers. So if I only had 4 workers here, I would not even have the ability of using that specific special action on the telegraph spot, but I can still go there in order to get some more stocks. So now let's go ahead and take our bonus of a new train. There are 4 different options to choose from. This one gets us $600 when activated. This one is 3 new Western Union stock. This gives 3 bumps on the scoring track. And lastly, this one lets us put a railroad down for $100, but we also don't have to pay any penalties for the mountains in that area. I think let's go ahead and grab this train, and we can go ahead and add this into our area. With that, we are done with our Western Union turn, so it comes back around to us. It's our 4th turn of the game, and it's time to talk about the trade action. We can go ahead and activate that with our white worker again, and at this point, I think it's worth noting that there is this middle action that is associated with the white workers, but you can also do this middle action with any of the other colored workers if you feel like it. And this one lets you take any of your workers from your pool and put them down onto one of your milestones. You'll notice that there are these requirements on the milestones, but you also need to sacrifice a specific colored worker onto that milestone that you will lose permanently. And you can do this before you have even met the requirements on the milestones themselves. So when I put this down here, for instance, I could go ahead and activate this middle bonus action, taking this teal worker and putting it down onto the milestone so that once we have completed the lower part, we will be able to evaluate this, flip it over, and have 18 points ready for the rest of the game. So now let's go ahead and do the rest of our trade action, and this is actually pretty simple. First, we get to discard 1 house token or 1 railroad token from our player mat, and you have to do it from the leftmost side, and we will gain money equal to the column that that token is in. So if we discarded this, we'd get $500, or this, we would get $600, but we lose them permanently. So in this case, I think we would probably get rid of this one right here in order to get $500 back from the bank, and now we get to flip over one of our trains. So this one, everybody starts with, and it allows you to take 2 of your workers from your pool and put them down onto your milestones. But we've already taken care of that with this action here. So let's go ahead and do the other train that we just bought. We can go ahead and flip this over. We see it's going to cost us $100, but we can then put a railroad down onto any connected spot on the board. So we go ahead and discard this, and then take our leftmost railroad token, And let's go ahead and put it down here. This means we now have our second railroad tie in a spot with this brown triangle, and that means that our milestone is now fulfilled. But we'll go ahead and evaluate that at the end of our turn. We need to finish up our trade action, and specifically, we have finished up all the specific things we need to do, but I want to talk about the trains a little bit more. You'll notice that when they are on this colored side, there is this 8 victory points in the top left corner. But once you flip it over, that is now gone and everything is gray. That means that if the game were to end right now, we would actually get no points for this specific train. And in the future, if we do an activate train action, we can activate this one here and flip it back over, but we don't actually get any benefit or bonus action. The only thing that this does for us is it means we now have 8 points again if the game ended, and this is once again available for use. So in order to get the benefits specifically out of your trains, you essentially need to activate them twice. So let's go ahead and evaluate this milestone. We're going to discard this worker and we'll flip this over and get the 18 points at the end of the game. And now we get to take a new milestone from the next stack up. This was an A milestone, so we get to draw from the B stack. We will take 3 of these from the stack, flip them over, and decide which one of these we want to try and work towards. We're going to try to get synergies based off of the things we've already done out on the board. So we might look to this and see that if we are connected to different level 2 cities and 2 different level 3 cities, then this would give us a bonus. And right now we are actually connected to 2 different level 2 cities. So in this case, I think we'd probably go ahead and take this one. It's also worth noting that it's worth a lot more points if you complete it, but it also costs 2 of your workers from your worker pool in order to actually evaluate this milestone. Now that I've shown you how all 4 of these basic actions work, I'll explain to you how the purple bonus works for all 4 of them and not go into the specifics of the other colors, but just to give you some flavor for the different bonuses you get for using these more specialized workers. If we were to build a station with a purple worker, then we would also be able to spend $100 and do another one of our train flips, which is really nice. If we were to go ahead and build some railroad track, then we could actually spend $300 to buy a new train. Next, if we were to use this one in the Western Union area, we could swap any one of our workers for a different worker from the pool. So this is a nice way to turn your white workers into a specialized colored worker because, as you can see, there's literally no reason to have white workers in the game since any of these colored workers can also evaluate the bonus in the middle. And lastly, if we were to use this purple worker over here, we would, in addition to getting trade money and flipping over a train, we get 3 bumps up on the scoring tracks. There's one more thing I want to show you before we go into how the game ends and final scoring, and that is these deals right here. It's a big stack of different cardboard bonus tokens that evaluate on turn whenever anybody put a little house token down into one of these spots on the Western Union area with this deal icon, or putting at least one railroad down into a spot with this icon. Then the player who did that specific action has the ability to do the top and the bottom by discarding the set number of the Western Union stock in order to get the bonus. So this would let you discard 1 stock to flip one of your trains, and this lets you discard 4 stock in order to take a teal and a gray worker into your pool. Looking at this one, you could spend 1 stock and $200 in order to get a purple person into your pool, and you can also spend 4 different stock to get 4 bumps with these scoring tracks. Now, everybody else around the table also has the ability to evaluate this deal, but they only get to pick one or the other from these 2 options, not both, like the person who actually activated the deals. Players are going to keep taking turns evaluating actions and removing these from their map in various ways until at least one player has removed all of their wooden tokens to the left of this symbol right over here. Once that happens, you're going to complete the round, going back to the person who is the start player, and then you will evaluate one more full round around the table. Once that happens, the game will be over and everybody will evaluate final scoring. Firstly, let's go over the 3 scoring tracks on the right-hand side of the board. The first one gets you a certain number of points for the number of the Western Union Telegraph buildings you have down on the bottom. The next one is going to give you a certain number of points for each of these stations that you built out on the main map. And lastly, you're going to get a certain number of points for each of the level 5 cities that you are connected to via your railroads. There are only 3 of these level 5 cities, so at a maximum, you would multiply this by 3. Next up, each player scores for all of their completed milestones, so this one will not be evaluated. They flip all these over, and that'll be a certain number of points they get. They add to that the number of face-up trains they have in their area. This would be 16 points for this player because this one is face down. And lastly, they get adjacency bonuses based off of where they put their Western Union telegraph stations. So they will get 8 points because they have a station in both of these adjacent places, but since there's a gap here and then this station, they will not get either of these 5-point bonuses because there is no specific adjacencies there. Once you add all these things up onto your score pad, you see who has the most points, and they're the winner. Let's now begin the review for Railroad Revolution by covering some positive points. The first of these has to do with the great number of great options that you have available to you pretty much every turn of this game. A big part of that is because it is a very forgiving system as far as allowing you options. You can go on the same action multiple times with your workers. Once you've played all your workers, you just pull them off your board and immediately start playing them down again. There's no stall turn where you have to like refresh and pull them off. Everything in the game seems to be, yeah, sure, type of mechanic, especially when it comes to money. Now, you're going to be spending money like crazy, but there are lots of ways to get it. It's like, oh, if you're running out of money, well, one of the 4 actions, just go there and throw away a piece of wood that you had in your area and get a bunch of money back for it. And you know what? As the game goes on, we'll give you more and more money instead of less. Like, I'm used to it getting more tight as a game goes on, but with this one, it just gives you more and more money. It's quite nice. I mean, you will definitely have turns where you're like, oh, I wish I had more money right now. But if you take one turn to get that money, your next turn you will have tons of money. You'll probably find yourself in positions where you're like, how could I ever spend this much money? And then 3 turns later, you're like, crap, I need more money. But it's so easy to get. Also, if you go to the Western Union spots, then you are going to get points if you put them adjacent to each other. If you discard a worker, you can get a really powerful action, and you're going to get a bunch of these telegraph shares, which are really good for money, but also for activating the deals, which give you more stuff. So when it is your turn, or specifically when it's not your turn and other people are taking their turns and you're thinking about what you're going to do, there are so many different paths to think of. And I often feel like I have 4 different great options and I need to figure out which one I want to do the most. And I really enjoy being in that position. It's kind of like a very friendly glut of options, and it's just been fun to play through those. For positive number 2, I want to discuss the different colored workers and how cool a mechanic this is. You have these actions, and you start the game with probably 4 of the white workers, which are very boring. They don't do much interesting, and you probably want to get rid of them as fast as possible for the purple, teal, gray, and orange workers, because when you evaluate those 4 main actions in front of you, each of those has 4 sub-bonus actions depending on what color worker you put down onto that spot. I guess technically there's a 5th sub-option for the white worker, but it's the same for all of them, and you can do that 5th spot with any color worker, so there's really no reason to keep white workers in this game. And I just love the decisions that come from this. You can look over and see you have like a purple, an orange, and a gray person, and you decide, okay, I really want to build rail this turn, and now you look down and you need to figure out which one of the workers do you want to actually use based off of the bonuses they have, based off of what your current position is, and also based off of what you might want to do on the next turn and what worker are you going to want to use for that one. So there's really good planning when it comes to those, but it's also fun because it's a fluctuating pool of workers. You start the game with 5 of them, but there are many ways to get rid of workers. You're going to be actively throwing workers away constantly, which means you need to actively gain more workers because there is a constant cap of not being able to go lower than 4 workers in your pool. If you're at 4, you're not allowed to get rid of any, and there are really good reasons to get rid of your workers. So it's fun to work on this pool to kind of build it up, and then when you are making decisions as far as what you want to do out on the map, many of those decisions have to do with what color worker do I want to gain for considering what I might need for my milestones, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, as well as what actions do I want to do further down the line. So I just really love the process of figuring out which worker you're going to put down, which is kind of has to do with the first positive point I talked about with all the planning. But I think as a mechanism, it's a really solid one to have that pool ebb and flow, fluctuate, and then also just give you so many more interesting, cool things. And doing these bonuses, they all seem neat. So I really enjoy the colored worker aspect to the game. Let's now shift over and cover a couple neutral points, and the first of these has to do with the milestones that you're working towards as you're playing the game. Now, on the one hand, I love this mechanic. It's super cool because it dictates how you're going to be making the decisions as you're playing the game to try and kind of puzzle in and figure out how to do everything you want to do, as well as match up with the milestones to cash them in to get new milestones. But on the other side of the things, whenever you finish a milestone, you draw 3 from this larger stack and pick one of those and hope that you pick a good one. You might find a perfect milestone for everything that you have done already. You might have completed almost everything for it, and you just have to do 1 or 2 more things, which lets you cash that one in, then jump up to the sea level milestone. Or you might draw 3 that are nothing like what you have been investing in already, and that is a pretty big bummer. Now, fortunately, there are 2 tracks of milestones that you are working on because you have 2 A's, which means once you complete this A, you jump to the B, and if you draw 3 terrible B's, then just complete this A, jump up here, and then odds are very unlikely that you're going to draw 3 more terrible repairable B tiles. So in that case, you just keep going with that track and just leave this one kind of to the wayside if you want to keep going after the milestones as the game continues. And I also enjoy that as you gain new milestones through these stacks, it pushes you westward. Like once you get to the C stacks, you need to be kind of in the 4 zone, and finally those D stacks, you need to be all the way on the west coast with some of your railroad tracks as well as stations in order to complete those, and that's super cool. But again, the luck of the draw seems rather significant in this case, and I feel like I wish when you're playing the game, you just take the whole stack of milestones and pick from all of them. This would get rid of all of the luck. It would also make it more competitive with your opponents to try and complete milestones early so that you get first dibs at the new ones, and it would probably make the milestones stronger, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the review, but I'm also not crazy about house ruling games. So I'm not totally sure how I stand with modifying the milestones. I love it as a mechanic. I love it as a thing that helps you figure out your decisions, and I love how it pushes you across the map, but I really don't like the luck of the draw. For neutral point number 2, I want to discuss the multiplayer solitaire nature to this game. Most of what you do is not going to affect your opponents in any real way. In fact, the main way that you can really do anything to them is by getting to a spot before they do in order to evaluate the first player bonus in that location, whether it's the telegraphs getting more of the shares or building a station out on the map to get that extra bonus. And this is not insignificant because especially those station bonuses out on the map, they can be really nice. But there are also ways to get around this. You can play, I believe it is the Gray Worker in both of those different action slots in order to evaluate the first station bonus anyway. Of course, if you're the first person there, then that Gray Worker lets you evaluate it twice, which is also really nice. But you will rarely be playing the game and feel like the person who is playing right before you did something that totally messes you over. Occasionally it might if you don't have that Gray Worker available to you and you were really planning on taking that first bonus, but for the most part you're playing your own game, which means that while you're doing all the analysis and planning what you want to do on your turn, you are less likely to get completely upset and need to start something over again when somebody does something that you weren't expecting. And I am very much okay with a multiplayer setting in a Euro-style game like this. But like I said, I just want to make sure that you knew about that going into it. Let's now move on and discuss some negative points to the game, and the first is definitely the most significant. I've noticed that in every game that I've played so far, the person who won also went rather heavy on the Western Union placements on the board as well as maxing out that Western Union track. It becomes somewhat obvious after playing the game a couple times that there appear to be 2 strategies to the game. One is to put track down and then put stations out on the map to match the milestone cards that you have in front of you, and the other is to go somewhat heavier with those Western Union spots and then just go track on the board and not really do as few stations as possible in order to get to the West Coast and score on that track as well. And in general, I don't have a problem with multiple paths to victory in a game. I do have a problem when one seems dominant, and I especially have a problem when I feel like this game should only have one path to victory from my perspective. And that's because when you do that Western Union railroad track strategy, it's boring. Because you could do it every single game. There's going to be no variance between one game to the next, and what your opponents do will have no bearing on whether or not you can do it or not. If they go into one of the Western Union spots and get a first player spot before you, that's not going to derail your plan. And so it's unfortunate that one of these strategies is so simple, and it's also unfortunate that this strategy seems to consistently win over and over again. Now, I'm not saying that you will never be able to beat a heavy Western Union strategy with a milestone heavy strategy, but I will say that you're going to work 10 times as hard on that milestone strategy and still likely not win. And that's just not fun. I really like the milestones. I really like putting stuff out on the board, and I really like the Western Union area as a means to an end to get your shares so you can do the deals, to do some of those really cool abilities out on the board, but I don't like that it seems to be such a strong enough thing to the point of not really putting any stations out on the map at all. So I really wish that the Western Union was less strong, and I don't understand why the scoring track is so short. It's so easy to get to the top of it and score lots of points, and I also don't understand why the penalties for moving up that track are so tiny. It's like $50, $50, and then $100, and you will always have that available to you. Even if you are in a cash-starved moment, odds are good you have $50 lying around to do that. It really feels like they lost a zero or something, and they should be $500, $500, $1,000, and then you'd be much less likely to focus hard on doing the Western Union and max out that track so easily, and maybe you would focus every single game on trying to get more of those milestones done. And in that case, it wouldn't be like every single game you sit down and you just do milestones, that's it, and you ignore everything else. There would be reasons to go like crazy on milestones or just go moderate on milestones and try and work on other things as well. I think that something kind of went wrong here. And at the end of the day, after every single game, which I enjoy playing in the middle of it, when it's over, I feel a bit disappointed and I don't feel like the person who thought the hardest and made the best decisions ended up being the one who won the game. For negative number 2, I want to discuss specifically the A2 starting milestones. Now, you begin with an A1 and an A2, and the problem with the A2s is that they are all contingent on putting railroad tracks out on the board, and they just don't feel balanced to me. There is one that has to do with the plains, which has no penalty. There's one that has to do with the single mountain, one for the double and one for the triple, and for all these milestones, you need to put 2 tracks down. That means the difference between getting the 2 plains and the 2 triple mountains is $600 worth of penalties, essentially. Now, of course, there are other ways to put tracks down on those triple mountains without paying that money, but you have to work a lot harder to get to those spots. And I looked out at the board to try and see if maybe those triple mountains are just closer so you can evaluate that one sooner, and maybe the plains are just really far away and harder to get to. But that does not seem to be the case. Maybe it's slightly easier to get to those triple mountains, but not by much. And I just don't understand why these feel so imbalanced. I would take the double plains milestone every single time I play this game over the triple mountains. There's just no reason why you would want that harder milestone, and they're all worth the same amount of victory points as well. So, like, if I got the triple mountains and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to score 8 more points than that plains person, even though I have to work harder, I would be okay with that. It just seems like a weird oversight, and I don't really have a problem with the A1s. Those seem balanced enough to me. It's just specifically to those A2s, and it's to the point now where we're feeling like we should put it in a draft or some sort of incentivization structure when we sit down to play the game, because we just feel like the person who gets the planes is just too lucky in that respect. And finally, we have negative number 3, which is pretty simple. I just think this is not a very good looking game. When you look at the board on the table, it's not very compelling. There's some art smattered around, which is nice, but then there's also large swaths of just kind of yellowish brown in the middle of the plains of the United States. And I suppose to a certain extent, this makes it easier to see the in-game functionality on the board. You don't want too much art getting in the way and making it overwhelming. But on the other hand, this is just so drab and underwhelming that it's a bit of a bummer. I feel like it must have been a intentional decision on the publisher's part to go with this specific art aesthetic, and it might work really well for some people, but for me, I just find it pretty lacking. Let's now go into the variability for Railroad Revolution, and I think that it is average. This is pretty much what I expect when I sit down to play a new game. We have a little bit of variable board state where we have the shoveled up station locations out on the board, as well as the Western Union spots. You also have different milestones that you're shooting for each time you're sitting down to play the game, and I think that provides an average amount of flexibility and variability from one game to the next. You are not going to sit down and be like, whoa, this game is totally different than the last time I played it, but you are likely to sit down and feel like you're not going through the same exact motions as you did in previous games, as long as you are not blindly following a Western Union heavy strategy, in which case that's kind of the blame is on you in that respect. Railroad Revolution plays 2 to 4 players, and at this point, I've played the 2-player game a couple times and the 4-player game a couple times. I never actually had a chance to try the 3-player, but I think that's probably likely the best because honestly, this game plays great at all of those different player counts. In the 2 and 3-player settings, you're going to put some stations down on the map from the non-played characters so that there are less of the first-player bonuses to go ahead and grab. And since this game is largely multiplayer solitaire, having more or less players around the table from you is not going to affect what you're doing too terribly much. I think 3 is maybe slightly better than 2 just because there is going to be a little bit more interaction and potentially more people maybe gunning in to take up some of those those first player spots in the Western Union. Although, of course, there are going to be some more blockers down there when you're playing the 2-player game. So honestly, all 3 of these player counts are really quite solid for the game. In conclusion, I've played Railroad Revolution 4 times at this point, and it has surprised me twice. The first time it surprised me was with my first game. I was interested in trying this out because I had taken a look at the rules and it seemed interesting enough, and then I played it at Board Game Geek Con, and it blew me away. I had so much fun. I think at one point in the game, I was just like jumping up and down with excitement. I was enjoying the process of figuring out what I was going to do with my workers and getting new different colored workers and activating those bonuses and making all these different great plans. I was loving it, and everyone around the table was just like, wow, this game is so good. This game is so cool. We were just loving it. And the game ended, and that was fine. I didn't win. Whatever, that's cool. And then I played it again, and then this time I noticed, that really does seem like that Western Union is rather strong. And then I started seeing people talk about this online, and I started thinking about it a lot more. And then I played it again, and this time I decided I was going to try to abuse the Western Union and see if it really was that strong. So I played the mindless strategy where I just went crazy on the Western Union. I got the railroad track all the way to the end. I tried to max out my tracks, and I easily beat my opponent, who was working really hard the entire game trying to execute these milestones. They got like 4 or 5 more milestones done than I did, and I still beat them. And at that point, the game really started to fall off the edge for me. And this is the second surprise. I'm surprised at this point. I am so disappointed in it, and I'm surprised that I am not wholeheartedly, enthusiastically recommending it based on how excited I was after my first play, because I really love a bunch of the stuff in this game. The worker mechanic is just wonderful, and the way you put the stuff out on the board and the way you chase those milestones are just really great. But this game seems to be somewhat damaged by the Western Union ability to just get so many consistent points with nothing that your opponents can do. And now you might be saying, well, just don't do that boring strategy. And you might be right. If I play this game again, I don't think I will ever just go crazy on the Western Union to prove that it's overpowered anymore. I will try to do the other stuff. But I also feel like next time I sit down to play this game, I am going to try it by adding a 0 to the scoring track for the Western Union, so it's less incentivized. So there's less of a reason to go crazy on that spot and more of a reason to go for the interesting decisions, the things that you really need to think about. So it is possible that there is a great game in here that just needs a little bit of tweaking and house ruling to find, as far as I'm concerned and as far as my greater group is concerned, but it is pretty disappointing that I have to dig around and try to develop that great game for myself, and it doesn't come that way fresh out of the box. At this point, I'd like to thank everyone who's been supporting this channel through Patreon, including all of these producer-level pledges. If you too would like to directly support the channel, you could do so at patreon.com/JonGetsGames, and I would super appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.